What if I told you that every country on Earth, rich or poor, democratic or authoritarian, is part of a machine it can never escape from? A machine that feeds on promises, turns debt into power, and converts entire nations into collateral. It's invisible. It doesn't need guns, soldiers, or invasions. And yet, it conquers more effectively than any empire in history. Every financial crisis, every bailout, every currency collapse, they're not random events. They're maintenance cycles of this machine. Today, we're going to uncover how this system was built, how it enslaves governments through debt, and why breaking free might be the most dangerous act a nation can attempt. This is the story of the global debt machine that turns nations into collateral. Debt wasn't always a weapon. In ancient times, debt was personal between merchants, families, or city-state. You borrowed silver, you repaid silver. There was no central authority manipulating credit. But that changed in the 17th century, when the idea of national debt was born. It began with war, the most expensive human endeavor. In 1694, England was bankrupt after decades of conflict with France. Desperate for funding, King William III turned to a group of private financiers. Their proposal was revolutionary and dangerous. They would lend the crown money, and in return, the government would give them a monopoly on issuing notes backed by that debt. That institution became the Bank of England. From that moment, debt was no longer a burden, it became a business model. The nation owed money, but now the money itself was based on the debt. It was the birth of the sovereign debt market, a system where nations could issue bonds, trade their obligations, and use promises as assets. For the first time in history, a government could spend wealth it didn't yet have by mortgaging its future. As empires expanded, so did the machine. The Dutch, the British, and later the Americans discovered that controlling credit meant controlling the world. By the 19th century, European powers used debt to fund colonial expansion. Railways, ports, and industries were built with borrowed money, but always under the supervision of Western banks. If a country couldn't repay, it didn't lose just money, it lost sovereignty. When Egypt defaulted on its debt in 1876, Britain and France seized control of its finances and later, its government. When Mexico couldn't pay European creditors in the 1860s, France installed a puppet emperor. Debt had become the new colonial weapon, invisible, clean, and devastatingly effective. The empire no longer needed to occupy your land, it only needed to own your bonds. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the machine evolved again. After World War II, the world's economy was in ruins. The US stepped in to lead a new financial order, the Bretton Woods system, created in 1944. The deal was simple. The US dollar would become the global reserve currency, backed by gold, and all other nations would peg their currencies to the dollar. But hidden inside that arrangement was a trap, the mechanism that turned the global economy into one interconnected web of debt. At first, it worked. The system brought stability. But by the 1960s, something was breaking. America had printed more dollars than it had gold to back them. The Vietnam War, social programs, and foreign spending pushed the US deeper into debt. Foreign countries began to notice. In 1965, Charles de Gaulle demanded that the US exchange France's dollar reserves for gold. Others followed. And then, the gold started running out. In 1971, President Richard Nixon made the fateful announcement: the United States will suspend the convertibility of dollars into gold. In that moment, the last tether to real value was cut. Money became pure debt. Now, the entire world ran on promises, and those promises could expand infinitely. The global debt machine had been fully unleashed. Once the dollar was no longer backed by gold, the US could print endlessly and other nations followed. But that new freedom had a dark side. Developing nations, encouraged by institutions like the World Bank and the IMF, began borrowing heavily in the 1970s to finance modernization. Oil-rich countries lent their surplus petrodollars to Western banks, who in turn lent it to Latin America, Africa, and Asia at favorable rates. Then came the trap. In the 1980s, the US raised interest rates to fight inflation. Suddenly, poor countries owed twice as much overnight. They couldn't pay, and the machine collected. The IMF stepped in, but not as a savior. As a debt enforcer, nations received bailout packages, but only if they followed structural adjustment policies, cut public spending, privatize industries, open markets to foreign investors, devalue the currency. Each condition stripped away national control, transferring wealth and power to global lenders and corporations. By the 1990s, dozens of nations from Argentina to Zambia were trapped in cycles of debt and dependency. Their resources, ports, and public assets became collateral for loans that could never truly be repaid. After each crisis, the world swore it had learned its lesson. But instead of dismantling the machine, we made it bigger. The 2008 financial crisis should have been a reckoning, a moment to question how infinite credit could sustain finite economies. Instead, governments bailed out banks with more debt. Central banks lowered interest rates to near zero, printing trillions in new money. That liquidity flooded into markets, creating bubbles in housing, stocks, and sovereign bonds. By 2025, the total global debt, government, corporate, and personal has surpassed $315 trillion, or nearly 4 times the world's total GDP. We now in a place where debt isn't just an instrument. It's the foundation of the global economy, and nations themselves have become the collateral pledging their future productivity, tax revenues, and sovereignty to sustain an illusion of prosperity. Even developed countries are trapped. Japan's debt to GDP exceeds 250%. The US owes over $35 trillion, and Europe's stability hinges on central banks buying their own government's bonds to prevent collapse. The machine doesn't discriminate anymore. It consumes everyone, creditors and debtors alike. The pattern is clear, and it keeps repeating. A nation borrows to grow or stabilize. Debt becomes unmanageable. External institutions step in. IMF, World Bank or private lenders. Austerity follows. Assets are privatized. Sovereignty is diluted. This isn't theory, it's history. In Greece 2010, austerity destroyed entire generations while foreign banks were bailed out. In Sri Lanka 2022, debt defaults led to loss of control over national infrastructure. In Zambia 2020, a single missed payment gave foreign creditors leverage over key state assets. The pattern is ancient. Only the language has changed. Instead of armies, we now have ratings agencies. Instead of invasions, we have debt restructuring. Instead of colonies, we have economic zones. The machine evolves, but its purpose remains the same: to turn every promise and every nation into collateral. So what can we learn from this global debt engine that never stops turning? Takeaway 1. Debt isn't inherently evil, but when it becomes limitless, it replaces real productivity with speculation. Prosperity becomes an illusion. Takeaway 2. The global financial system isn't broken. It's designed this way to keep nations in a cycle of dependency, ensuring that control stays with those who issue credit. Takeaway 3. When money is created as debt, freedom itself becomes collateral. Every empire eventually runs out of resources, but this one runs on belief. The belief that promises can be infinite. But belief has limits, and when confidence in the system finally cracks, reality will demand repayment, not in paper, but in power. If you want to understand what happens next, start by asking a simple question: who really owns the debt? Because the answer to that question decides who truly owns the world. Fade to black. Text on screen. Subscribe for more deep dives into money, power, and the hidden systems shaping the modern world.